When I think of labor battles in the United States, I'm thinking picket lines, slogans, maybe some chanting, and a couple of fights they break out when the scabs try to cross. For anyone familiar with construction, you may think of the big fake rat. What you don't typically think about is machine guns, planes dropping bombs, and military tribunals. That's just not what crosses your mind when you think of labor battles. But for the West Virginia mining industry from 1912 to 1921, that's exactly what was happening. There was even an Old West style shootout. To cap it all off, you had an 80-year-old woman named Mother Jones helping the workers. And yes, she is the Mother Jones that inspired the well-known magazine. So this is the West Virginia Mining War. Truthfully, I had absolutely no passing knowledge going into this. I'd never heard about it. But boy, am I glad that I saw it mentioned in some random book so that I could research it, because this is a fascinating tale. Let's start with the situation in the mines of West Virginia in the early 1900s. Well, life was pretty hard for the miners. They worked backbreaking days in the mine, which, for anyone unfamiliar, you're in this deep, dark place where you're able to be bent over a lot or you're squatting down, and you're inhaling this terrible dust. It's a deadly job since mines do collapse and deadly gases build. These men are struggling every day at their work. So you might think, hey, they're making good money, right? No, no, no. They were paid very little, and they were paid in company scrip, meaning money that only could be used in company stores. And these stores had prices far higher than third-party stores. So the mining companies essentially made money twice off the miners' labor. They made money when they sold the coal that was mined, and then they made the miners pay for regular goods. There's a famous song called 16 Tons written about Kentucky mining. However, it's a very similar situation to what's going on in West Virginia. I'll spare you my singing, but it goes, "You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company's store." Pretty self-explanatory what was happening. Miners had to live in company housing since mining corporations owned all the nearby land. I know some people might think that's not too bad since the miners don't have to pay for their housing, but in practice, it's awful. Mining companies could evict a miner at will anytime, and of course, when they fired someone, that person was kicked out of their house instantly. At one point, West Virginia courts ruled that the relationship was not between landlords and tenants, but between masters and servants. Think about that. The relationship was between master and servants. And again, I can't stress how dangerous this job was. Being a miner in West Virginia had a higher proportional death rate than the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I. You would have been safer going to war than being a miner in West Virginia, relative to the amount of people working. So miners thought, hey, we need to strike. We need to make a fair living for the hard work we do. This isn't right. They pay us nothing, and what we are paid, we can only use at the mining stores. They own that literal house. They kick us out instantly. We need something. I think we'd all feel something similar. But the mining companies didn't want to let go of control easily. So a labor battle broke out. A violent, ugly struggle that ebbed and flowed over the decade. Before continuing, let me give you a little insight into who the miners were. They were hard men working these impossible jobs. They were a mix of immigrants from Eastern Europe, Italy, along with African Americans. The community did contain a lot of single men, the type that could be described as hard drinking and quick fighting. Right now, close your eyes and try to think of a West Virginia miner in 1912. I bet you nailed it. For miners with families, the wives played a crucial role. They taught the children, they were the seamstresses, they ran the houses. They basically made the community function. And when miners went on strike, their wives were right there with them, trying to fight for better rights. The miners did attempt several strikes before 1912. However, that's not really my discussion here, because the most famous ones are from 1912 to 1921. But obviously, it is important to note that they did try and just were never very successful. The mining companies did a fairly good job of shooting down strikes. So the year is 1912. U.S. miners everywhere are struggling, leading to the creation of a nationwide group called United Mine Workers of America, UMWA. And I'm definitely not trying to avoid singing the song Bop by Hanson. Definitely not. Those looking to unionize in West Virginia thought the group looked good, so they joined it. Mining leaders then targeted the Conoway Coal Operators Association, which led them to Paint Creek, West Virginia. The mining leaders brought the following demands before the companies: an 8-hour day, a pay increase of 5 cents per ton, for companies to refrain from blacklisting union members, for companies to install accurate scales on all mines, and guaranteed free speech and peaceful assembly to all miners. I mean, these are fairly reasonable. Putting myself in the miner shoes, I'm looking at it like, yes, a realistic schedule, better pay, and hey, don't cut us out because we're in a union. Also, the scales you're using which determine our pay, They need to be real and fair, not, tilted in your favor. And like every American, we should have the right to free speech and peaceful assembly. It's an American right. Mine operator said, I don't care that it's an American right. No. They said no to everything, even when the miners removed all their demands except for a pay increase. So the miners went on strike. Listen, these mine operators were cold. They weren't going to just let this happen. So they hired the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, similar to what the Pinkertons were, if you know about them. I just need to say it cracks me up that you have someone like the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency calling themselves detectives when you really see that they spend a lot of their time doing guard work or strike breaking. What cases were they solving? So the detectives came in to act as guards and strike breakers. Almost immediately, they started evicting mining leaders from their homes. I should say one such leader was Frank Keeney. Keeney is an important figure because he was a socialist who ended up being the premier West Virginia mining union leader during this time. So he's a good person to know. The strikers would not be dissuaded, so the operator said, we need to step up. And they said, hey, Baldwin Felts, evict everyone. There's a story out there that's so absurd, I have to repeat it, where the agents evicted a miner and his wife as she was giving birth. When they kicked her out, do you think they said, case closed? So the evicted strikers had to move to a tent town called Holly Grove. This didn't seem to change the mind of those strikers. They just kept doing their thing. So one day, the Baldwin Felts detectives decided, let's fire some shots at Holly Grove. That's a logical next step, right? No one was killed or injured, but wow, what an escalation. Now I need to remind you what the miners were like. They're not pushovers. They're quick to fight. They're not just going to sit there and say, you shoot us, and nothing will happen. So on the morning of May 29th, miners fired upon the Baldwin Felts agents as they were eating breakfast. Again, no one was injured or killed. I don't know if these people are stormtroopers from Star Wars or if they didn't actually intend to hit anyone. I just don't see how you don't get anyone. That's a lot of luck, but that can only continue so far. On June 4th, the detectives made a move to intercept strikers planning a raid against the detectives. The resulting gun battle left 1 miner dead and 5 arrested. This would be the first of many killings by the Baldwin Felts agents. The worst part is once you kill one person, you're only going to get more anger, more hatred, more need for revenge. There's a story by historian David Corbin, who's a great historian. You guys should be reading his stuff. It's in my notes. He does a fantastic job of covering all this. But anyway, Corbin describes a story in which a train conductor carrying wounded miners and agents witnessed a miner spitting tobacco juice in the eyes of a dying agent. Gross. That's all I have to say about that. So, the miners needed help, and that's where our famous Mother Jones comes in. Mother Jones was from Ireland, but she became synonymous with labor battles in the United States. She would basically travel across the country and help anyone who was fighting for their labor rights. Jones would lead protest marches in West Virginia capital of Charleston. She used her friendships with the Democratic congressman to stage a protest in the Armory of Washington, D.C. Spoiler, she had limited success in West Virginia. Violence intensified. West Virginia Governor William Ellsworth Glasscock decided it's time for martial law. And I don't know who this guy Marshall is, but he's a jerk. Glasscock's successor, Henry Hatfield, would also use martial law when he took office in 1913. At first, it seemed like a good thing. It would apply to everyone, force both sides to disarm, but in practice, it favored the operators and left strikers in a weakened position. The biggest reason that the miners ended up worse off with martial law is because the military seemed to only target miners for arrest. The military arrested 200 miners and Mother Jones. The striking miners were accused of violence that led to a death of a company clerk. They faced military tribunals, which had sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. Mother Jones was sentenced to the penitentiary for 3 years. Once again, stop and think about that for a second. U.S. civilian citizens being subjected to a U.S. military tribunal. That is insane. However, this didn't go unnoticed, and Mother Jones did know influential people. So she sent a letter to the Secretary of Labor, William B. Wilson, and Senator John Kern. Kern even read a letter from Jones during a session of Congress. This led to a Senate investigation, and Mother Jones' ultimate release from prison. Mother Jones struggled to stop the violence, but she was able to help the miners with their legal woes. The miners and the companies did sign an agreement in 1913. The Senate investigation into the use of martial law removed the possibility of it being used again in the near future, and so the operators felt like they had to cut a deal. They granted the original demands. After the strikes, mining was good for the mining companies. Why? Because World War I happened, and suddenly the demand for American coal skyrocketed. Things got even better for the companies when America entered the war. Now, if someone refused to work, they looked like a traitor. Working was supporting the war effort. It was patriotic. Operators seeing their chance reversed course on what they had agreed to under the guise of patriotism. It should probably also be noted that West Virginia miners, having a socialist as their leader, did themselves no favors in terms of public opinion. So for miners, it was time to fight back again. However, this time, instead of Paint Creek, the battles would take place in Mingo, Logan, and McDowell counties. Union leaders Frank Keeney and Fred Mooney tried to send supporters into these counties in November of 1919 to help everyone out. However, they were unsuccessful, and there were rumors circulating that the miners who went in were beaten and murdered. A story becomes a story. It's hard to tell what is true, but what I know is true is that somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 coal miners marched on Logan County seeking retribution. However, West Virginia Governor Cornwall appealed to the miners and avoided some really disastrous bloodshed. After settling down, things got bad again in the spring of 1920, when the miners wanted formal recognition of the union, and the company said no. They fired and evicted anyone who signed a union contract. They actually wanted workers to sign an anti-union contract. Obviously, things are getting heated. There's tensions again. So who do the mining companies go to? That's right, the Baldwin Felts agents. I guess you call them detectives. Included in this round were the brothers to the head of the company, Albert and Lee Felts. Albert Felts was in Mingo County declaring he was there to evict miners, something the local sheriff disagreed with. The sheriff declared he had no right, and furthermore, he was acting without a warrant. When I wrote an article on this, I stopped here, and I'm going to stop here again. There's times in history when you see a name, and you just think to yourself, did I cross over topics? Am I still learning the same thing? And this is one of those times. It's where I found the name Sid Hatfield, as in, yes, those Hatfields, the famous ones. I know Hatfields are big in West Virginia. It shouldn't have been that much of a surprise, but still, shocking to run across that name, especially because he plays kind of a big role in this story. In many ways, Sid Hatfield seems like a character in a Western. He liked shooting pool, playing cards, and enjoying a nice drink. He also wore 2 pistols, which he could draw with each hand. He was a mine worker at one point, so he knew how bad it was. More importantly, he was the police chief of Matewan Township. And I apologize if I say that wrong. I'm about to describe a scene which is covered in great detail in historian Lon Savage's book, Thunder in the Mountains, The West Virginia Mine War 1920 to 1921. It's a fantastic book. On May 19, 1920, the Baldwin Felts agents walked into Matewan Township looking to evict miners. Sid confronted the agents, but Albert Felts declared that they had the right to be there. Sid went and contacted the county sheriff, who told Sid they had no right to be there and he should arrest them. Sid confronted Al Felts when the agents re-entered town, but then weirdly Al Felts came back with a counter that he had a warrant for Sid's arrest. Al Felts must have been a poker player, because that's an awesome bluff. This forced the town mayor, Cable Testerman, to enter into the confrontation and state that Felts' warrant was bogus. And then something happened that no one clearly can define. Someone shot someone. Sid claimed Al Felts fired first, while the Felts family claimed Sid fired first. In the end, doesn't really matter. The mayor was shot in the stomach and Albert was shot in the head. Neither survived their wounds. A fight broke out like it was the OK Corral, and gunfire was all over the place. The Battle of Matewan claimed the lives of the mayor, the 2 Felts brothers, 5 agents, and 2 miners. It's hard to say who shot first, but the Felts family always said Sid shot first because he actually wanted to shoot the mayor, because he was in love with the mayor's wife, Jessie. Sounds like gossip, which was my initial impression. However, Sid did marry Jessie not long after the shooting, so I get it. That's an eyebrow raiser. Violence intensified, so federal troops had to go into Mingo County. They kind of settled everything down. Once the area had calmed down, the federal troops pulled out. However, there were dynamite explosions, shootings, and the killing of state troopers soon after. So the federal troops had to come back. They were gone for 24 days. Sid Hatfield doesn't have a happy ending. He was acquitted for the murder of the Felts brothers, but he was charged with conspiracy to other mining-related violence in other states. On the morning of August 1st, 1921, Sid and his co-defendant Ed Chambers, along with their wives, all made their way to the courthouse steps. Baldwin Felts agents opened fire on the 2 men as they stood on the steps. Both were killed. Baldwin Felts agents claimed Sid was trying to draw on them. I don't know if I believe that, but that's the way it works. So, back to the miners. Tensions are high. Miners gather together preparing for violence. Dear Mother Jones enters the picture again. She tries to settle things down. She did a move that I don't know why she did it. It's absurd. She produced a fake letter from President Harding saying that he would help the miners if they returned home. But Frank Keeney, you remember the famous mining leader, called her bluff and even told the miners it was a fake. So Jones had to actually leave rather quickly. Her pleas for no violence were gone. The only thing that stopped an all-out battle was Brigadier General Harry H. Bandholz when he arrived and said to the mining leaders that if things didn't calm down, Bandholz would have the military force take care of things. Mining leaders turned around their anger group. It's one thing to face down the Baldwin-Felts agents, but it's another to face down the United States military. You'd think with all that violence, local authorities would want to calm things down. But that's not the case if you're Sheriff Don Chafin of Logan. On the afternoon of August 27th, Chafin had the genius idea to arrest a group of miners for a previous transgression. Chafin's deputies marched their prisoners to the town of Sharples. Guess who they ran into? That's right, armed miners. Naturally, a shootout occurred, and 2 miners were fatally wounded. Great job, Chapin. You should know what happens next. If you don't, really? Well, anyway, yes, miners marched on Logan County again. The following weeks would be filled with the constant violence as the Battle of Blair Mountain raged. It's not the Blair Witch Project or the race to Witch Mountain, it's the Battle of Blair Mountain, just in case you keep mixing them up in your head. Not like I was doing. The Battle of Blair Mountain is wild to read about because it happened in the United States during peacetime and against its own citizens. Starting on August 31st, armed miners began assaulting Blair Mountain and its defenders, who were led by Sheriff Chafin. Chafin's men may have been outnumbered, but they had the high ground. They also had machine guns and planes. Yes, planes. Chafin hired private planes to drop homemade bombs on the attacking miners. I couldn't find exact casualty numbers since they range from 16 to 100. It really is that wide of a range. Considering there were machine guns and planes with bombs, I'd have expected higher casualties, so small blessings. Battle stopped when federal troops arrived on the scene on September 2nd. I'm not sure what troops expected, but I don't think they expected the miners to be happy to see them arrive. By all appearances, the miners never had intended to fight the United States military. Again, double think things when the military's involved. The Battle of Blair Mountain ended the West Virginia mine wars. The following years would be a mixed bag for miners. Many would see themselves accused of treason only to be acquitted, but some did have to serve time. The mine guards were not subject to the same level of scrutiny, nor was Sheriff Chafin, considering he was allowed to keep his job. However, several years later, Chafin was arrested for operating a speakeasy. What a great guy. Miners eventually achieved their goals, but not until the 1930s. They would also not achieve anything through violence. Miners won their victories through legal battles and leveraging their combined voting power. I will say the mining wars live in West Virginia's history and legend. As I wrap up, I just want to express this was a fascinating story. I never expected labor battles to be real battles, but here we are. I encourage everyone to read about it. Again, my sources are listed. And like, subscribe, do all the fun stuff. Thank you for your time.